All right, so we're live. Hi, my name's Joe. I'm joined by Leah, who is our. I'm sorry. Could you could you tell us what your title at Fight is?
Newly minted campaigns and communications director at Fight for the Future.
And today we're going to be discussing a new page that we just launched called "Who Can Get Your Book," and it is about accessibility in literature across all formats. And it's something that Leah has been working on for a while, and I thought it would be really fun to discuss that today. So Leah, could you maybe intro this a little bit and explain the project?
Yeah, totally. So, Fight for the Future works on issues around monopoly, the right to information access, and also around copyright and the ways that copyrights are harming artists and creators instead of helping them make a living from making their art. And this issue with equity in publishing is incredibly complex and also extremely problematic. It's an issue that, like, essentially what's happening is that libraries, public schools, and also indie booksellers are facing massive barriers in offering digital books to patrons. Those barriers can be financial. They can come in the form of exclusives or embargoes that restrict access or lending the ability to sell and profit from books just because they're in a different format. And in the case of ebooks, a format that is less expensive to make and also thus more profitable than a paper book for publishers. Uh, it's a bit esoteric as a concept generally. And so one of Fight's strengths has always been coming in and coming into a complex issue like net neutrality and breaking it down to explain it to people why this is important, who it's harming, and what we can do to fight back and change the status quo. And as we've seen, this week with California's uh, gold standard net neutrality law getting through the courts and being allowed to actually be enforced finally, this sort of activism and awareness raising can be really effective in struggles for our digital future that many folks might not be oriented to. So we've created this website to illustrate the different impacts across beloved institutions. That's public libraries, public schools, and independent booksellers like an indie bookstore. And the people who are affected by their struggle to access digital books. And so that's all sorts of different people with reading differences and barriers, everything from people with disabled people who are, have dyslexia, people who are blind, etc., to those who speak English as a second language and maybe are able to consume English, learn pronunciation, etc., best through an audiobook format. Or people who live in a rural area and have difficulty getting to the local library to pick up paper books, or people who have a low income and struggle with transportation costs, time for transportation, time to go pick up and return physical paper books. So there are all of these wonderful celebrated solutions that digital books can offer to all of these people with barriers to love of literature and reading. And especially young readers who are used to using these sorts of devices to consume entertainment or to learn. And while the industry has spent a lot of time celebrating this, they've simultaneously been ramping up the prices and ramping up the restrictions on these formats to actually make them more difficult for the people who need them most to access. So the end result of that is is that these institutions that typically have a set budget, like a library has a purchasing budget every year, it doesn't really go up or down unless they appeal to taxpayers for more, are aren't able to do what they've traditionally been able to do for authors and for people in publishing who aren't like uber bestsellers. So if a library has a fixed budget, and if ebooks and audiobooks are more expensive, this just means that they're going to have to spend more on surefire bestsellers and less on new or mid-list authors. And that sort of creates this, it feeds into this like monopoly machine that we've been seeing in publishing, where Amazon has so much power and is squeezing all the other publishers down and down and down from like big 5 publishers. Now we're maybe going into big 4. A couple of years ago, it was the big 6. And they're having to consolidate in order to compete with this monopolistic behemoth who's selling books at a loss because they can afford to, because they have so much money coming in from like Amazon Web Services, for example, or from other industry that they hold large control over.
What do you think their strategy is with selling books at a loss? Are they trying to get people on their hardware platform with Kindle, or are they just trying to get customers into their system to spend money on other stuff? Like, what do you think the motivation is there?
That's a great question. And the thing that we always have to think about when we're talking about Amazon is that Amazon is ultimately a data company. What it cares about is collecting data on us. And that is why it creates so many native platforms that it controls to lure people in. And some of those platforms that it's doing this with are Kindle, Audible, Goodreads. These platforms that they own, that people use to consume, rate, discuss the books that they love, are actually massive data mines that Amazon is using not only to cement its hold on the publishing industry, but also to undercut institutions like libraries by sharing partial data about how library users are interacting or are taking up books, reading books on Kindle. And leveraging that data to convince publishers that libraries are actually bad for publishing, which is fundamentally untrue. So this, it's a multifaceted motivation. It's ultimately like they have a great strategy that's data-driven to overtake the market. And the more data you give them, the more power they have, and the faster and better they're able to do it. So it's a vicious cycle, and one that we really have to break out of. And one of the ways that we think one of the ways that you can best illustrate the impact of an Amazon or any new law, restriction, technology that's problematic is by looking at the communities on the fringes first. And so that's what we've done with this website. We're looking at these people with reading differences and barriers that I previously mentioned, rural people with disabilities, et cetera. And yeah, so ultimately, like what we're talking about here is libraries having to make a choice between diversity of books and diversity of offerings, and really offering ebooks and to some extent audiobooks at all. Like there are libraries that are making a choice this year on whether or not to end their ebook lending programs entirely, which would create this disenfranchised class of, or further disenfranchise this class of readers who also have generationally struggled for this equitable access to books, literature, learning, human knowledge. So yeah, I think that it would be good to go ahead and walk through the website. So I will take this opportunity to press the screen share button and click on this window, and there we go. Looking good, Joe?
Yeah, that looks good to me.
Great. Okay, so we've started with just basically the concept of creating something that's pretty and book-based. So at the top of this page, we have this great graphic that Bastian, our designer, found that is all about multicolored books falling down. And the question that we began with is really simple, same as the URL, who can get your book? Because the people who need to be asking themselves this question are first and foremost the people who are involved in publishing and activists and advocates who want to bring equity to the space, to the access to human knowledge. So that's sort of explained in this short paragraph here. we created a quiz that awards 1 point per equitable choice that you can make in a publishing distribution process. So essentially, like simple things like, you know, will it be released in paper, because paper is very accessible for deaf people, for elderly people who don't use technology, for people who don't have the technology to read paper books, read ebooks or audiobooks. And Bookshare.org is an incredible resource that's sort of been built on top and over using existing ADA and Marrakesh Treaty similar laws to essentially make digital books that are accessible to folks with disabilities, regardless of all of these restrictions. So ideally, every author would have all their books available on Bookshare.org to make sure that they're available in the most equitable format for people with legally qualifying disabilities to read.
And how common is that among like published books? Like how frequently are books up on Bookshare?
You know, I'm not really sure. It really depends on the orientation of the publisher, the author's representatives, whether or not they're aware of this tool, and if they are taking those, you know, extra steps to make sure that those books are on that platform. So if you're curious about whether or not your book is, or your friend's book or what have you is on there, go check. And if it's not, you can contact them, or the person who owns the rights can contact them and get it fixed. And I've heard that traditionally, like, publishers are amenable to doing that because it makes sense to, like, if a person can't consume your book any other way, they aren't going to buy your book in a format that they can't access. So put it up on Bookshare, win-win. And then the next question is if it's released, is whether or not there are embargoes, which is like an unpopular thing to do on Kindle, and actually something that one audiobook vendor, Blackstone Audio, is experiencing boycotts from, or has been experiencing boycotts from libraries about them restricting new titles from being released through libraries at all for 90 days. And that's important because books are most popular in their first 90 days. That's when they're in the most demand, when they're receiving marketing pushes, et cetera. And if public libraries and public schools libraries can't offer that title at the time when it's most in demand, that's, you know, inequitable for people who can't afford to buy the book, first of all. And then also, when you think about it from an indie bookseller perspective, if during the greatest marketing push of this book, no platform but Amazon can sell the book, that cuts out your local indie bookstore from making those sales for people who are ready to read it as soon as they hear about it. And during the greatest investment time of getting this book in front of people, if they can only buy it from Amazon, that's the lion's share of the profits. So let's say ideally, no, you don't have any embargoes or exclusives. And that's the same, and then what is this one? Public institutions, right. Okay, so licensing agreements are often really restrictive. A licensing agreement is why public schools in California are currently paying $27 per person, per student, per book, per year to read The Diary of Anne Frank in ebook format. This is, I mean, like, I might have stumbled over that a little bit, but every student that reads The Diary of Anne Frank in ebook format in California, in this California public school district that I'm talking about, the school district has to pay $27 of taxpayer money in order for that student to read that book that traditionally in like a hardcover costs a fraction of that.
What is the justification from publishers like for that type of a price? Because it's pretty obvious that an ebook, you don't have to pay to print it, you don't have to pay to ship it. How can they justify charging a school district like $27 per book in that case, just because they're trying to make up for profit they could have made if it was print?
I mean, there's no profit to be made up for because the amount of books that you need for students to read is the same, whether it's in ebook or paper book format. This additional cost for ebook, I mean, there's this argument that publishers make that, you know, for a library, for example, if they sell you an ebook forever, then that is them losing money, because after, you know, 30, 40 uses, that a paper book would wear out and they'd have to buy a new one. And I've seen a lot of, you know, solutions to that with libraries, and that's fair. Like that is something that, you know, that in current pricing and copyright models makes sense to address. Like, publishers shouldn't be losing money because they're offering ebooks. But what's happening in this case is not that. Not at all. I am not really sure what the justification is for charging $27 per license for this book, and having it expire after 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the things that is also really troubling, and especially for folks who follow Fight for the Future, because of our anti-surveillance work, is that part of the reason why this school is locked into paying so much for ebooks is because California has a law that prevents the harvesting of student data for profit, essentially. So this school district can't use Amazon Kindle, which may be offering the Diary of Anne Frank at a cheaper price in exchange for harvesting data from these students. Or, you know, Epic is another platform that does a lot of invasive data harvesting on student readers through ebook format. So essentially, school districts often are having to, in addition to facing costs that are higher for ebooks and licensing terms that are really restrictive and expire super fast, they are also trading their budget for giving away students' data, what kind of readers they are, that sort of information. And that's something that we actually really want to learn more about and look more into, like what kinds of data are school districts giving away on public school students through the use of ebook format. And it is really important to note that, like, the pandemic has greatly accelerated the use of ebooks in education settings. There's a lot of struggle for teachers in school districts to try and get paper books to students at all who don't have transportation to go and pick up paper books from the school, whose parents might not have the time. Like, it's an incredibly difficult time to be an educator, and ebooks and just handing the students an e-device once that they can recharge, that books can be pushed through over the internet, is amazing and a really powerful solution, but it's coming at a cost that is wiping out our taxpayer dollars with really no justification, or like making a data farm out of our public schools with little to no restriction or oversight. So that's really problematic. So those are licensing agreements. They're bad in terms of how they're being put together and enforced right now across the industry. It's there isn't really a price justification that is equal to the cost of a paper book for ebooks. So ideally, you would hope that this book could be purchased and used just like a paper book by a public school or a library, etc. So that is the best choice here. And then we've already gone over these issues more or less. Exclusives on audiobooks, which are, you know, obviously a different format and often come with their own different, you know, restrictions and what have you. And I'm just going to go ahead and click through this because we've been on this quiz forever. And so also with this quiz, it's important to note, like, we aren't collecting any data. So people can create this customized graphic. I'm just going to write test here. Test, and test. I don't have an image to upload for the book cover. So anyway, get your grade. And this is a scorecard that we've generated with a letter grade that gives people an overview of their you know, of their scores, of how their books are potentially supporting or detracting from the services and operations of public libraries, public schools, and independent booksellers. If people upload the cover of their book, they can have their title, author, publisher, and download an image to share this on social media. So I will go ahead and close out of that, scroll down. A lot of what I've talked about in terms of accessibility, pluses and minuses, and the barriers that are experienced with different book formats are available in this summary area here. And then here's the really fun part. We took some popular books and we put them through our quiz using the best distribution data we were able to get. And here we go. This is Michael Pollan's Audible original Caffeine. It's a book about how caffeine and tea have like shaped civilization. It's actually pretty cool. I'd love to read it, but unfortunately I don't support Amazon and I can't get it anywhere else. Because this is an Audible original, it is exclusively available via Amazon's Audible format. So that means you have to consent to invasive data tracking. You have to consent to giving your money to Amazon. You cannot support an independent bookseller by buying this book. You can't get it from your public library and you have to pay money to access it. So really, you know, across all formats and all barriers, like there's no way to get this book unless you go to Amazon, which is really an inequitable choice on behalf of an author who I really enjoy and find to be a really thoughtful person. His How to Change Your Mind was one of my favorite reads of last year. So I'm glad.
That is a very good book.
It was a fantastic book.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And so I'm hoping that in the future, I'm hoping that Michael Pollan might see this and think about doing something a little differently.
Say you wanted to even purchase it, is it only available through an Audible subscription? Can you even technically like own a license to it, or do you just have to have an Audible subscription to listen to the book at all?
That's a good question. So there's an important differentiation to make here, is that a licensing agreement by definition removes the possibility of ownership.
Mm.
So you actually can never own this book. You can temporarily license the right to read it through creating your Audible account and using one of their Audible, you know, whatever option of the day Amazon is using to lure people in and get their data. But you can never own Michael Pollan's Caffeine.
And I guess that sort of applies to Kindle books too, right?
Yeah, it depends on whether or not they're an exclusive. If, you know, or if they're being published in paper format, because obviously with paper, while there are like copyright restrictions on what you can do with a paper book, but when you own that book, like you can sell it, you can loan it out to a friend. It's a physical, you know, I'm like wanting to grab one from my shelf. I'll grab it for the actually. Like I can loan this to you. I can sell it. I can tear it apart and make art from the pages. I can do whatever I want with this book. More or less within the restrictions of copyright and fair use, which in itself is its own like cesspit of problematic situations. But like there is no this with a licensed ebook or audiobook. I can't loan it, I can't sell it, etc. It is just like for a limited time you are allowed access to this book, and if the publisher decides that they aren't going to carry that book anymore, that it's obsolete, if you know, you want to end your account with that company because they're a bad company, if the company goes out of business, then you lose that access that you paid for. There's no ownership. Licensing is access only.
Right.
And that sucks, you know, like that's something that really a lot of the librarians that we've talked to over the course of learning about this issue and building this project are really upset by the concept of ownership ending. And our friends over at the Library Futures Project actually did a really great webinar recently called The End of Ownership. It was, I think that's available through the Library Futures website. You should definitely look them up if you're more interested in that topic, because it's disheartening to think that, you know, our access to knowledge and information is just going to continue to be gated away from us and become less and less tangible as time progresses.
Do you know if there are any ebook vendors that sell like actual EPUB files rather than licensing to download it?
Yeah, totally. So I can scroll down in the scorecard. I'll skip Trevor Noah, who also did bad, and Frank, who I've already talked about a little bit. And so we have PM Press, which is a really rad anarchist press, and they are green on ebook in our scorecard because you can buy this book from their website. You can download it to your computer. That file becomes yours on your own personal property, and you can do with it as you want. And the publisher supports you in doing that, just as they do for the paper edition of Pictures of a Gone City or any ebook that this publisher publishes. So there is, the vision and the possibility is out there for, ebooks to be treated in this more equitable way. There's this fear among publishers that because a digital file can be replicated, that reduces the friction of getting that book for free. And it's the same concern that the recording industry had, the music industry had about Napster back in the day, that, oh, if you can download it for free, then profits are going to plunge down the tube. And like those conversations are important and need to be had because we really do need reform in how we're supporting artists in this country. The struggle of being, writing these beautiful books that take years, that take such a huge, team for the art, the editing, everything. Like there is a whole team and ecosystem that makes this incredible art that is feeling the squeeze in a really big way right now, for a lot of the reasons that we've talked about. And they deserve to be supported. They deserve to put food on the table. They deserve to have whole, healthy lives, and to make this art that we all enjoy. So that conversation, I think, again, is a larger conversation that I'm really excited to be learning more about and to be having with the whole fight team. But again, even a radical, amazing press like PM, who are so cool and so supportive of the right to own, still don't have their audiobook accessible anywhere but Amazon Audible, because audiobooks are a whole different beast that are incredibly difficult to manufacture. And they, when looking at solutions for how to create an audiobook for this, this piece of work that they felt was incredibly important, what was available to them was Amazon, and Amazon actually has its own service to create audiobooks that ostensibly makes it easy, but actually says it's going to make it easy, then forces you pay them to make it easy, and then they essentially load back all the labor of creating that audiobook on you as the publisher or the author, and then you create this audiobook that's great, and it is only available via Audible. So that's also really exploitative. I think that the publishers at PM Press likened it to a landlord-tenant relationship, in which the landlord has all the control and the tenant just has to accept what's there, or else they can become unhoused somewhere else. And that's part of it. That's been the experience of a lot of people trying to do audiobooks with Amazon and their death grip on the market.
I don't know how closely you were in touch with this publisher, but did they explain the reason that they can't simply host the audio file the same way that they're hosting the EPUB? Or was there a reason given why they were forced to use Audible?
If you think about the process of making an ebook, the fact that you need recorded talent, you need to be creating chapters, you need a whole recording studio essentially to make an ebook, and that isn't necessarily accessible to a small or medium-sized publisher for them to hire their own studio and run that own process.
And is this what Audible did for them? Is they contracted with Audible to get the recording done and everything?
Yeah, so Audible has like this, or it's not Audible, it's I feel like it's like ACX or something like that. But anyway, it's Amazon's audiobook creation and has the ability to, or has like this network of voice talent who can do the recording and all of that jazz, who are already set up. And then also put it in a format that makes sense, chapterize it, et cetera, et cetera. There are some things in that process that can be easily automated, and they've also just like made the connections. And then at the end of the day, like once you've paid for their help to create that file, it's only available via licensing agreement with Amazon. And that's like, that may not be a perfect explanation of what's going on there, but that's like, those are the broad strokes. Cool. And then I guess, and then we just, of course, on our sites, we try to, and in everything that we do, we really try to include references and links out to learn more about these issues and where they're occurring, additional reading. Yeah, so that's this website. And so if you are probably watching this live stream, if you are a sighted person like me, then you don't really see so much the incredible accessibility work that has gone into this. We reached out to like an accessibility activist who has their own like digital consulting firm, Sina Baram with Prime Access Consulting, and worked with him and his team to sort of take like our traditional best practice accessibility work to a whole different level with a lot of really unique and custom coded things like, the quiz, like this scorecard, which, I mean, the sheer endurance of these people to go through this step by step with their screen readers and help us make it accessible was like really powerful to watch, and also super fun to know, like, for the people that we built this website for are often people who have limited vision or are blind, who use screen readers to access technology, to access the written word, to know that they can come here and they can participate in a way that is really accessible to them and is pretty darn cool. So I'm super excited that we've gotten to do this website with them, and also the fact that like our in-house devs are so enthusiastic about it and taking what they've learned and going to apply it to our other websites in the future. So we've really taken this opportunity not only to make a site about these issues, but also to level up our own activism and its accessibility to people with vision differences, which is super, super cool.
Yeah, that's excellent. Are there any authors or publishers that you can reference as an example of groups or individuals that are doing it right right now?
It's really hard to do it right now.
Mm.
That's the long and the short of it. Like, if you are an author who wants to self-publish, you're more or less reliant on the Amazon ecosystem to do that, which is also scary, from the perspective of, I worked in the music industry previous to this role, and I watched as Facebook became an incredible tool for musicians to get the word out about their shows, to reach people, to grow fans and networks, and really like ride an incredible wave of popularity and connection. And then Facebook started changing its algorithms, and all of a sudden, Facebook wasn't that for musicians anymore. And my fear looking at Amazon is that Amazon's interests aren't the interests of authors. Amazon's interests are the interests of Amazon. And I'm so nervous thinking about all of these authors who are so talented, who've like poured, their souls and their livelihoods and everything into building up this their self-publishing empires using the Amazon interface, and just knowing that with the flip of the switch, that Amazon could change everything and could really end all of that hard work and that and erase it, more or less, if they wanted to, if that was to their benefit, and that makes me really sad. And then on the more traditionally published sides, that's like if you're going through being published by like Penguin, Random House, or Macmillan or wherever. These issues are largely decided between the publishers and the biggest bookseller in the world, which is Amazon. And again, Amazon is going to push for terms that are in their best interest, and their best interest is monopolization and data collection. So again, to sell books effectively to a large extent, if you're aiming to be like a popular trade or a popular author in traditional publishing, there's not a lot of options for you to opt out of this game. And publishers too are that aren't Amazon are really, they're struggling to compete. There's the new like antitrust lawsuit on ebook fixing going on right now, and there was one a couple of years ago about like publishers banding together with Apple to try to resist Amazon, and it seems like no matter what publishers that aren't Amazon do, without real enforcement of our antitrust laws to break this behemoth up, they just keep having to scrap to survive and to sacrifice things like equity in the name of staying afloat to a certain extent. And that's not really, an excuse necessarily, but it is a tension and something that that's worth a conversation and worth understanding, because there are a lot of really incredible people working in this in the publishing industry who want to do right, who are really shocked and saddened by the state of things. I would posit most people, in fact, and it's just because we're all caught in this beast together, and we need to dismantle we need to take on heckin' Sauron. That's what we need to do.
Well, even with what seemed at the time to be pretty formidable competitors, stuff like Nook from Barnes and Noble, who are by no means a small company, even they got totally wrecked. I don't even know if Barnes and Noble makes those anymore. It was at least encouraging when Barnes and Noble was still doing Nook, because there was some competition within the ebook industry.
Yeah, I mean, there still are other e-reader formats, and there are amazing companies doing like helping independent bookstores sell audiobooks like Libro FM and others. So Amazon isn't the only name in the game. It's just that they're the biggest name, and continuing to leverage all of their power to get bigger, and doing it while operating at a loss to undercut the pricing of any other competitor that they might have. So there are alternatives out there, and there are really good people doing that work too. It's just about the fact that you can't, if people are going to shop based on price and not on values, you really can't compete.
Right. Could you maybe, and I can put these in the chat, list some of the alternative options that people have if they do want to bring their business outside of Amazon for ebooks and things like that?
I mean, yeah, for just an average, like if you're an Audible subscriber now, you can go over to Libro.fm and you can subscribe there. A lot of local independent bookstores are affiliated with Libro. There's audiobooks.com is another one. For ebooks, there's let's see, there are also, I mean, the thing that I would recommend the most is reaching out to your local independent bookstore and seeing if they have those partnerships, or even calling, or even reaching out to one city over. During the pandemic, a lot of independent bookstores have really ramped up their digital presences. Like I have this tiny little local bookstore down the street that has, it's half yarn and it's half books, and it's amazing. And their website now, I can go there, I can search just like on Amazon, order any paper book I want. They have a partnership with Libro FM. They, and I'm sure I could get ebooks too, although I'm like a weird one. I'm so exhausted with screens. I've been reading on paper, so I'm not as up on that one personally. But I would really start with putting your money as best you can through your local community to the tech companies that are working to keep a portion of their revenue local and circulating in brick and mortar mom and pop bookstores. So I would say start with your local indie. They don't have it, go to the next biggest one. If they don't have it, go to the next biggest one in your area. Or whichever one you love the most. Like if you really loved visiting plug for Pals in Portland, if you loved visiting them when you were here, like on your Pacific Northwest leave vacation or whatever, you can do it through them. But again, Pals is a bigger one, and the smaller ones are the ones that are going out of business right now and hurting the most.
Ideally, looking into the future, what are some major changes that you could see that would improve the conditions here that we've been discussing today?
I think the biggest thing is for libraries to libraries and public schools to really, and taxpayers to really recognize this threat to these beloved public institutions, and to sort of, and to demand the equity that that really is obvious to anybody who's hearing about this. It is obviously wrong. A year of one copy of Diary of Anne Frank is costing a California school district $27. It is, obviously wrong that it's 3, 4, 5 times more expensive to have an audiobook or have an ebook available at a library for 12 or 24 months than it is to own that paper book and have it there for years. These issues are really specific and something that can sort of get lost in the shuffle of all of the justice movements that are going on right now. But I think that it is really obvious to all people involved that it's a lack of access to education. It's a lack of access to public knowledge, to stories that are different, of people who are different than ourselves, of different experiences. It's really a lack of the sort of spirit of public schooling and spirit of public libraries that that to me is foundational to the culture of the United States, that we raise people up to see beyond themselves, and that these works of literature are the way that we do that. And that's what's been missing. Like No Child Left Behind really left behind a whole generation of that learning. And and with this consolidation and outpricing and like narrowing of the voices that libraries can afford to offer, and that public schools can afford to offer, it's hurting us. We're seeing it hurt our democracy. We're seeing it hurt us on an individual level, on a racial justice level. Like we've got to recognize that like this education and experiencing difference are fundamental to healing what's wrong with us right now. And that's why this issue, I think, is, I'm really passionate about this issue, and it's important to us as an org.
And before we close, was there anything additional that you wanted to touch on or bring up before the end of the stream?
Gosh, there's so many facets to this issue that my brain just explodes in 1,000 directions when you say that. I think that, if people want to help in terms of this campaign specifically, right now, our big ask is that you actually contact your favorite authors and ask them to take this quiz. because really the advocacy here, and one person who's been an amazing example of it is Cory Doctorow, always at the forefront on copyright and associated issues. Like, he was able to crowdfund his own audiobook recently for a recent release, and had a hugely successful crowdfunding campaign. It was really awesome. And has been an outspoken advocate for ownership, for letting people have these files, all the things that we've spoken about in this live stream. But then yet still, he faced a huge problem with the Apple App Store and its monopoly on on having apps and having people pay for things through apps, and that 30% markup and or 30% of profit that they demand, and all of the above. So the issues here are so systemic that first we need to name them. And the we that needs to be naming them the most are prominent authors who can afford to speak out, because there are many authors down the line, mid-list, new authors. And when I say new authors, I am specifically talking about authors from marginalized communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color authors, LGBTQ plus authors, those authors for whom it is already a struggle to become published at all. And they are already fighting so hard for their right to exist in the publishing space, that it really behooves those who are successful and those who can afford to speak out on this issue, because through taking on the lack of equity and access to digital books and the threat to the future of public libraries and access to literature in public schools, you're doing a service to our whole country. So and to the world. So as individuals, contact your favorite authors, send them the URL whocangetyourbook.com. If you are an author and you can, say something, point your fellow authors this way. Increasing awareness is the first step to change. And this is what that's about, because all of this is incredibly esoteric and complicated and purposely hidden from us. And whocangetyourbook.com is there to bring light to the shadows in publishing and hopefully make a more equitable digital future.
Lia, thank you so much for joining me today. This was episode 3 of the Fight for the Future weekly live stream. We're going to do this every week on Fridays at 1 o'clock. If you liked the stream, make sure to like it on YouTube. If you want to be notified when we go live in the future, make sure to click the bell. And if you aren't subscribed and you want to get notifications for this content, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Thank you everybody for joining us this week. It was a really interesting discussion. So thanks again, Lia. And we will see you guys next week. Bye.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Joe. Bye, everybody. Have a good weekend.